The quantity of viable of ideas. B. The quality of those ideas. C. The ability to capture those ideas in detail, and D. The process to differentiate good ideas from bad. (149). Chapter 8. Diversity. Diverse membership within teams can be a tremendous asset. At the same time, diversity tends to magnify the typical challenges present within most groups. Diverse teams must learn to appreciate their functional, cultural, and geographical differences before they can harness the power of their collective wisdom. This chapter will discuss the benefits, challenges, and potential of diversity. Unfortunately, the outcomes of diversity are not always positive. A skilled and insightful leader can be the difference between success and failure in a diverse team. Case 8.1, Deloitte. As one of the most successful consulting companies in the world, Deloitte regularly shows up on lists such as Forbes magazine's Top 100 Employers, the Top 100 Places to Launch a Career, and, most important to this chapter, the Diversity Incorporated list of Top 50 Companies for Diversity, number 11 in 2013. Deloitte is an employer of choice among the top undergraduates and MBA graduates from leading business schools around the globe, competing with the likes of McKinsey, Bain, and Ernst & Young. It attracts the best and the brightest talent and is known for investing heavily in its human capital. In fact, it recently invested over $300 million in a new team development and leadership development campus in Westlake, Texas, called Deloitte University. One of the ways Deloitte has developed the stellar reputation as the top consultancy in the world is by utilizing and nurturing diverse, integrated teams of highly trained specialists, and Deloitte University is just the latest example of the extent to which Deloitte has learned to harness the power of diversity. Deloitte's success has not happened by accident. It has required a sustained and strategic effort to build internationally and culturally diverse teams, to create an integrated operational platform, and to struggle past the challenges of heterogeneity to a point where diverse groups can elicit the best that each member can offer. At any of Deloitte's client engagements, there is likely to be a fair amount of cultural, racial, gender, national, and functional diversity represented. In order to reach this rare level of interdependent and high-functioning effort, Deloitte holds leadership development trainings for its consulting associates from offices around the world who have been with the company for at least 1 year, as well as more advanced training and development opportunities throughout an associate's tenure with the company. Deloitte does this because it is dedicated to developing a cross-functional leadership pipeline that leverages diversity and ensures the future success of the company. Working in teams. 150. This training model is available to associates in either a 1-week or 2-week-long seminar built around consulting cases, cohort discussions, debates, projects, and team challenges. In many instances, associates are divided into teams to tackle the cases, for example, so that these professionals can learn, or refine, how to work with other exceptionally smart, driven, talented, competitive, type of leaders in a quick change environment. Consultants must be able to establish trust, develop understanding, scope and scale a project, delegate responsibility, and produce solutions on very short timelines. Deloitte University equips its associates to formalize these skill sets, philosophical bases, and best practices so that the diversity of the teams becomes a strength instead of a weakness. One way of forcing teams to learn how to adapt comes at various intervals during the case-based portions of Deloitte University's sessions. The consulting teams are given additional case information that brings unexpected changes, such as the sudden dismissal of the case company's CEO or a surprise legal investigation into some aspect of the company, and the teams have to find ways of accommodating the new information. This demands that the teams think outside of the box and, in many cases, calls on the full breadth and depth of the experience that all members bring, whether they are from offices in Atlanta, Singapore, London, Buenos Aires, or San Francisco, whether they are of European, African, American, or Asian descent, or whether they are men or women, gay or straight, young or old. Team members learn to work together to harness their collective capacity for solving problems throughout the workshop. While participants share a great deal in common since they are all members of the Deloitte community, the diversity of these teams presents a valuable challenge and learning opportunity. Not only are these rising leaders able to sharpen their consulting skills, they are also able to learn lessons about how to harness the strengths other participants bring from their respective backgrounds and markets. This is more than working in teams, this is leadership development and diversity training in action. It is how Deloitte keeps its diverse talent pipeline full. For example, according to a recent Diversity Inc. Top 50 list, it has double the percentage of senior leaders of Black, Latino, and Asian descent than the average company. According to a May 8, 2013, press release. We believe that diversity and inclusion are essential for sustainable success in today's business environment, said Kelvin Womack, Deloitte's managing principal for diversity. At Deloitte, by looking at our people holistically, there are more opportunities for advancement as well as a more productive work environment, resulting in greater value to our clients through a variety of experiences and perspectives. Case study discussion questions. 1. Why does Deloitte think diversity is so important? 2. What is uncommon about Deloitte's approach to diversity? 3. Name 3 short-term and 3 long-term diversity issues Deloitte University might help overcome. 4. Discuss how Deloitte University might eventually lead to a sustainable competitive advantage for the company. In her engaging and practical book on diversity, Laura Liswood, 2010, introduces the concept of diversity with a parable about a mouse and an elephant. When a mouse and Chapter 8 Diversity 151. Elephant are in a room together. The elephant is hardly aware that a mouse is even present. The elephant is powerful and strong enough that the mouse is of little concern. On the other hand, the mouse is very aware of the elephant. As a matter of fact, much of the mouse's movement is governed by the elephant. As a result, the mouse is very observant of what the elephant is doing at all times. Much of what the mouse does is determined by where the elephant is in the room, and what it is doing. This makes the mouse very perceptive and aware. In contrast, the elephant is, to some degree, oblivious to the fact that there are other creatures sharing the same space they inhabit. As a matter of fact, most elephants know nothing about mice. Furthermore, because of the elephant's powerful and elevated vantage point, it can be short-sighted and slow to react to changing conditions. Liswood goes on to say that this parable is a perfect example of how dominant and non-dominant cultures exist together in organizations and teams. Members of the dominant culture are rarely aware of the perspectives of the non-dominant culture. Yet members of the non-dominant culture are very aware of the movements and power of the dominant culture. And as the world has gotten more unstable and complex, the mouse and the elephant need to combine their resources and work together in order to survive. They have much to learn from each other's unique perspectives and life experiences. Applied to the context of teams, team members need to understand that people have different perspectives, and that those diverse perspectives can make the team stronger and more adaptable. Visible versus non-visible diversity. In order to identify how people differ from one another, some diversity researchers have classified those differences as either visible or non-visible. Milliken and Martins, 1996. Visible forms of diversity include characteristics such as race, age, and gender. Non-visible differences include individual variations in education level, socioeconomic background, personality, and values. Another type of diversity involves differences among people based upon cultural background. The distinction is important because different types of diversity affect groups differently. Thus, a mixed gender group with different nationalities and languages will experience diversity differently than a group of middle-class, white, male executives with different backgrounds in engineering, marketing, accounting, and human resources. In general, visible differences are more of a challenge to groups than are non-visible differences, Mannix and Neal, 2005. However, these outcomes are moderated by the work environment within which the groups operate, Jen and Bezrukova, 2004. Visible differences. With the diversification of the workforce over the last few decades, demographic changes have increasingly become a challenge for organizations. Employees tend to be more comfortable working with people who are similar to them, Mannix and Neal, 2005. Similarities among people create a sense of familiarity and security, and many of those clues about similarity and difference come from physical appearance. As a general rule, people are more trusting of those who look just like them. Working in teams. 152. Furthermore, as a result of past experiences, exposure to the perspectives of friends and family, and images from the media, individuals construct beliefs about certain groups of people that tend to be one-dimensional and overgeneralized. These broad categories are used to assess incoming data and make quick judgments. Often, people are categorized and judged by their external, visible characteristics. When this happens, superficial judgments run the risk of being unconscious, unfair, and problematic for working groups. Unfortunately, since many groups of people have unfair and inaccurate stereotypes, issues such as racial prejudice, sexism, ageism, and homophobia are not uncommon. Non-visible differences. Non-visible differences can be divided into characteristics that are either psychological, based upon personality, or functional, based upon occupation and training. Jackson and Ruderman, 1995. The table below describes 3 types of diversity that can exist within organizations. While demographic differences are most often visible, personality and functional difference are not. Psychological differences include those personality traits and characteristics that make people unique. Much of the research on personality characteristics uses the Big Five model of personality. The Big Five model is a well-established conceptual framework for psychological research that measures individuals on 5 dimensions: conscientiousness, agreeableness, openness, neuroticism, and extroversion. Halfhill, Sundstrom, Lanner, Calderoni, and Nielsen, 2005. Excluding neuroticism, each of the variables is positively correlated with team effectiveness. Teams tend to function better when there is a variation of personality traits among members. For example, it might be helpful if a majority of team members are agreeable. If there are not enough people with that characteristic, the group can get mired down in unproductive conflict and endless power struggles. But it is also important for some members not to have that trait. Otherwise, the group is susceptible to groupthink because nobody is willing to challenge the status quo and disagree with others. A healthy balance is ideal. Type of diversity. Examples. Demographic differences. Race, ethnicity, gender, age. Psychological differences. Personal beliefs, goals, past experiences, personality, interpersonal style, attitudes. Functional differences. Training, work experience, education, knowledge, skills. Table 8.1 Different types of diversity. Chapter 8 Diversity. 153. In the same way that psychological diversity is beneficial to teams, functional differences are also desirable when considering the composition of workgroups. Hutterman and Bordner, 2011. For example, a team leader might want someone on the team who is technologically savvy if he or she wants to utilize regular virtual meetings. That individual's specialized training and knowledge fill a need for the group. Cross-functional work groups capitalize on this philosophy by enlisting members with different backgrounds in education and training in order to bring a diversity of perspective to the group. Constructing teams of people with different functional backgrounds ensures that problem analysis and decisions are considered from multiple angles. Cultural diversity. Culture can play a significant role in groups and teams. Zhu and Shi, 2011. Members of the same familial, geographic, or professional culture typically share similar values, beliefs, and attitudes. Of course, Not everyone in a cultural group holds to the exact same beliefs in a consistent manner, but a common worldview helps foster a sense of community, mutual understanding, and communication. Stories and proverbs communicate and reinforce important values that distinguish one culture from another. Liz Wood, 2010. For example, Americans have the saying, "The squeaky wheel gets the oil," highlighting the importance of assertiveness and being outspoken in order to get what you want. But in Japan, a common saying is, "The nail that sticks out gets hit on the head." In a similar fashion, one might hear a grandmother in China say, "The loudest duck gets shot." The Japanese and Chinese sayings extol the virtues of conformity and quietness, in contrast to American assertiveness. Given these cultural traditions, it would be easy to imagine an American team leader becoming frustrated with Asian team members who were quiet and rarely participated in team discussions. Likewise, Asian members might be put off by American members who were loud and boisterous. Cultural differences can create misunderstandings that hinder team performance. Haas and Nuge, 2012. Cultural diversity can be an asset on teams because it brings fresh perspectives to discuss science. Crotty and Brett, 2012, but it can also be a potential problem if members are culturally ignorant or insensitive. In order to distinguish one culture from another, Trompenars and Hampton Turner, 1998, surveyed over 15,000 participants from 30 companies within 50 countries. They found 7 specific characteristics that distinguish one culture from another. 5 of those differences have to do with how people relate to one another, 1 has to do with attitudes about time, and 1 relates to perceptions of the environment. One of the ways cultures differ from one another is in how members relate to one another. Relationship norms are modeled, taught, and passed down from one generation to the next. They govern the interaction among members, and evoke various degrees of punishment if a member strays too far from acceptable interpersonal behavior. Trompenars and Hampton Turner, 1998, have identified 5 general differences in the way members of various cultures define relationships. Each of those cultural norms exists on a spectrum between 2 opposite extremes. Working in teams. 154. Universalism versus particularism describes the degree to which members adhere to societal norms and values. A universalist believes in universal rules that apply to everyone, while a particularist is willing to bend the rules based upon the circumstances, and give special treatment to those who are deemed worthy. Individualism versus collectivism describes whether people define themselves primarily as individuals or as members of a group. Individualists give priority to the individual, while collectivists regard the community as more important than any one person. Next, cultural norms define the appropriate level of emotion in interpersonal transactions in the dimension of neutral versus emotional. In a neutral culture, emotions such as anger or sadness are not displayed, whereas in an emotional culture it is appropriate to show such feelings. The specific versus diffuse dimension describes the degree to which members include their personal lives and business relationships. Some cultures are task-oriented, specific, and require little in the way of relationship building, while others, diffuse, invite people to share their lives with one another and welcome social connectedness. Finally, achievement versus ascription refers to the way people within a certain culture define status. Achieved status is granted on the basis of personal accomplishments, whereas ascribed status is awarded on the basis of other attributes such as age, education, kinship, or personal connections. Attitudes about time and environment are additional dimensions that differ among cultures and influence individual worldviews. Cultures with a past orientation value tradition and time-tested institutions and procedures. In contrast, a future orientation attempts to create a more desirable future by being progressive, innovative, and idealistic. A present orientation tends to minimize the value of tradition, and does not necessarily strive to improve the future. Instead, it focuses on present activities and enjoyments. In addition to these general orientations to time are norms regarding the role that time plays in daily life. In some cultures, for example, a 3 o'clock appointment should start exactly on time, while in other cultures it might mean any time between 3 o'clock and 3:30. Finally, attitudes about the environment or natural world often vary by culture. Some cultures attempt to control the environment, while others view it as something that should be honored and respected. In contrast to control-oriented cultures, those with a cooperative orientation understand events as product of powerful natural or supernatural forces worthy of respect. In other words, these cultures attribute events such as a booming economy or a catastrophic earthquake to external forces such as fate, luck, or a divine force, whereas control-oriented cultures place the source of good and bad events within human control related to effort, planning, and ability. People from diverse cultural backgrounds have different ways of seeing the world, relating to others, and solving problems. These differences can have a significant effect on a number of group processes including communication, member satisfaction, cohesion, commitment, and decision-making. Millikan and Martins, 1996. Unfortunately, members of Characteristics of relationships. Universalism versus particularism, individualism versus collectivism, neutral versus emotional, specific versus diffuse, achievement versus description. Chapter 8 Diversity 155. Certain groups are negatively evaluated and devalued based upon cultural differences. According to Bazerman, 2006, people have a greater tendency to attribute positive characteristics to their own cultural group, and associate negative characteristics with other groups. If group members are not aware of these in-group and out-group biases, an atmosphere of distrust and conflict can emerge, creating a suboptimal working environment. Attention must be paid to countering and minimizing internal biases and stereotypes in order to achieve optimal interpersonal dynamics and group performance. The challenges and benefits of diversity. With changing demographics in the United States, organizations are becoming more diverse. Hayes Thomas, 2004, Jackson, 1992. While individual differences, or heterogeneity, make it more difficult to create a sense of cohesion and trust in workgroups, a number of trends, including the growth of multinational corporations, the increasing age gap, and the integration of female, minority, and international workers within organizations, has increased the frequency with which employees interact with persons of diverse backgrounds. Millikan and Martins, 1996. Thus, it is particularly important to understand how diversity affects organizational behavior. To benefit from diversity, groups must overcome the tendency for interpersonal differences to divide. Group members must learn to embrace diversity and address potential problems before they begin in order to maximize the benefits of a diverse team. Diversity in work teams can increase productivity due to the benefit of multiple perspectives and skill sets. Holtzman and Anderberg, 2011. For example, because members of cross-functional work teams have more exposure to employees outside of their particular workgroup, they have the ability to generate a wider range of perspectives, and produce higher quality solutions than do functionally non-diverse groups. Millikan and Martins, 1996, O'Reilly, Caldwell, and Barnett, 1989. However, without effective management, diversity can create problems by compromising trust, cohesion, and a shared identity. Mannix and Neal, 2005. Diversity is a complex issue that affects organizations in various ways, both positive and negative. Jane and Dipboy, 2004. Not all forms of diversity foster positive relationships or working in teams. 156. Organizational effectiveness. Yet diversity has the potential to bring innovative and fresh perspectives to complex problems, and stagnant systems when there is an atmosphere of acceptance and psychological safety. Martins, Shilpsand, Kirkman, Ivanage, and Ivanage, 2013. In his book The Difference, Scott Page, 2007, explains diversity by using the analogy of a toolbox. He describes people as having different toolboxes with different sets of cognitive skills and perspectives. The more diverse a team is, the more tools it has to accomplish any given task. Page suggests that diversity based upon cognitive differences, that is the way people think and process information, is the real benefit of diversity. Diversity based upon demographic differences such as gender, race, sexual orientation, or religion may have little or no impact on team performance. In other words, when diverse perspectives are not relevant to the specific tasks the team is engaged in, diversity may not impact performance. As groups process information and make decisions, the most innovative ideas are often suppressed. As described in Chapter 6, on decision-making, group members tend to conform to the ideas of the majority. The Solomon-Asch line experiments, Asch, 1956, offer convincing evidence that members are reluctant to disagree with the dominant views of the group. In these experiments, more than a third of the subjects were willing to deny their own perception in order to side with the majority. People adopt the majority view because they assume that the majority must be right, and because they do not want to face possible rejection by others. But minority views are extremely important and can have a significant influence on a group. Martin and Houston, 2001. When dissent is voiced, members are more likely to question assumptions and consider alternatives, which increases the likelihood of groups selecting and developing more optimal solutions, products, and results. Namath, 1992. Minority perspectives are viewpoints held by either one person or a small percentage of members. Minority views are generally more divergent in thought, which can lead to greater levels of creativity and innovation in group decisions. Namath, 1986, 1992, 1995. When groups fail to consider alternative viewpoints, they are at risk of making premature and ill-informed decisions. Innovation and change often begin with an alternative view that is brought to the attention of a group. When members question the dominant position, the decision-making process is not only slowed down, preventing groupthink, it is also qualitatively changed. The minority position may not be adopted, but it can serve as a catalyst to help the group think more divergently, make better decisions, and improve group performance. DeDrew, 2002, DeDrew and West, 2001. Minority dissent prevents premature consensus and promotes cognitive complexity, but because groups generally resist deviant perspectives, group leaders have a tendency to encourage, and if necessary, enforce conformity to the majority position. Marx, Abrams. Chapter 8 Diversity 157. Paez and Hogg, 2001. In the classic Johnny Rocco experiment done by Schachter, 1961, participants were asked to decide the punishment of a fabricated lawbreaker, Johnny Rocco. A Confederate was planted in each group who insisted on an especially harsh punishment, which functioned as a deviant position within the group. After some initial attempts to change the mind of Confederates, groups stopped communicating with them and relegated them to low status and marginal roles. When group members were asked whom they would like to remove from the group, deviants were most often identified. It can be a very lonely and uncomfortable position to be in the minority on a group discussion. The pressure to conform is even more salient in homogeneous groups. Marx, Abrams, Paez, and Hogg, 2001. Group members who stray too far from collective attitudes and beliefs can be judged harshly. Deviant or minority perspectives are often incorrectly perceived as weakening the social identity and cohesion of the group. Thus, alternative views are devalued, marginalized, and discounted. Groups that value diversity and invite disagreement can avoid these pitfalls. When there is freedom to challenge and debate the dominant perspective, groups are able to consider more options and alternatives. DeDrew and West, 2001. In this way, there is an increased likelihood that the worst ideas are exposed and scrutinized while the best ideas will be identified, evaluated, and implemented. Outcomes of group diversity. The research on group diversity has produced conflicting results. Eli and Thomas, 2001, Mannix and Neal, 2005, Van Nippenberg, DeDrew, and Homan, 2004. In an attempt to synthesize the data, Millikan and Martins, 1996, surveyed the literature in 13 leading management journals between 1989 and 1994 and found 34 studies related to diversity in organizational settings. Most of the studies looked at the influence of visible demographic characteristics, race, ethnicity, gender, and age, and functional differences, educational background, occupational history, job-related knowledge, and skills, on group performance. Very few studies have focused on the effects of personality differences within organizational groups. In general, the majority of results indicate that diversity at all levels has the potential to increase the effectiveness of work groups, but it also poses a threat to the relational connectedness and satisfaction of group members. People tend to be more comfortable with those who are most similar to them. However, groups that are diverse have a greater potential for success, especially with tasks that require innovation and creativity. Cognitive outcomes and task performance. In terms of team performance, diversity has been linked to a number of competitive advantages. Millikan and Martins, 1996. Differences of ethnicity and nationality have been shown to improve the quality of ideas and level of communication on complex tasks. Presumably, these positive outcomes occur because heterogeneous groups are able to consider a greater variety of perspectives, eventually leading to more realistic and sophisticated ways to analyze issues, make decisions, and solve problems. While it might take ethnically diverse members longer to warm up to one another, cultural differences can garner a wider variety of perspectives within the group. O'Reilly and others, 1989. Working in teams. 158. Gender diversity has been linked to higher personal productivity for women when there are high-level female executives present in the organization. If women perceive that career advancement is a realistic goal as evidenced by the success of other women, they will work harder to obtain it. Gender diversity also influences the communication structure within a group. A study by Smith, Loven, and Brody, 1989, found that men were twice as likely to interrupt women as they were other men. Women were equally likely to interrupt both women and men, but were less than half as likely to successfully interrupt men. In terms of communication networks, diverse groups have access to and communicate more frequently with members outside of their workgroup. Millikan and Martins, 1996. Because members come from varied backgrounds, they are embedded in diverse social networks. Thus, diverse work groups gain valuable information and resources from outsiders, while avoiding insulated, limited perspectives. This increases the range of perspectives as well as the number and quality of ideas that are discussed within a group. Results for both functional and educational diversity are not consistent across work contexts. While boards of directors, top management groups, and organizational task groups benefit from diversity, other groups have mixed results. Groups that are more functionally diverse have better links to external networks, thereby allowing them greater access to outside information. But cross-functional teams also have greater process losses because members have different ways of approaching tasks and projects. For example, engineers might approach certain tasks very differently than would marketing specialists. Yet these differences, when handled properly, can produce a more comprehensive view of issues that leads to better decisions and more effective solutions. Millikan and Martins, 1996. Effective outcomes and relational connection. While diversity has the potential to improve the quality of work within a team, it can be difficult for minority members to feel like they are accepted and valued. In general, members who are racially and ethnically different than their teammates tend to be less committed to their organizations, and have higher rates of absenteeism. Millikan and Martins, 1996. Furthermore, minority members tend to have lower levels of group identification and member satisfaction, and are more likely to be evaluated negatively by their supervisors. Unfortunately, these lower levels of commitment together with lower performance ratings lead to higher turnover rates among minority workers. Functional diversity can also be frustrating for members because it incurs higher coordination costs than those for functionally homogeneous groups. Millikan and Martins, 1996. After all, it takes more effort to coordinate the work of members who have different skill sets and functional backgrounds. While it might be beneficial for engineers to work with salespeople and advertising specialists, it can also be difficult. Consequently, functional diversity has been linked to higher turnover rates and lower social integration within organizations. The most consistent finding in the review of diversity research done by Millikan and Martins, 1996, is that groups have a systematic tendency to homogenize all forms of diversity. Diverse groups have lower levels of member satisfaction and higher rates of turnover than homogeneous groups typically do. These results apply to multiple types of diversity, including race, ethnicity, age, and gender. In particular, minority members are less satisfied with their groups than are other members. However, if groups can overcome the Chapter 8 Diversity 159 initial difficulties and predisposition toward conformity, and learn to value differences, then they can experience the benefits of diversity. Watson, Johnson, and Zarides, 2002. Contextual conditions for success. Clearly, teams and organizations can benefit from a diverse workforce. However, some organizations either are not convinced of the benefits of diversity or do not know how to take advantage of it. Diversity will have a greater chance for success if A. the organizational or work group context is supportive of it, B. the influence of minority members is enhanced, and C. group tasks require creativity and a variety of perspectives. When these conditions are met, the power and potential of diversity are released. First, organizational and work group cultures that value diversity and cooperation are better suited to capitalize on the potential benefits of diversity. Homan and Greer, 2013. As Eli and Thomas, 2001, found, organizations that view diversity as an asset will most likely benefit from it. Jen and Bezrukova, 2004, studied 10,717 members of 1,528 workgroups operating within a Fortune 500 company to evaluate the effects of diversity on performance. In the study, performance was measured by merit-based performance reviews, bonuses, and stock options at both the individual and group levels. Members of functionally diverse groups had higher bonuses in departments that cultivated a people-oriented, cooperative environment. Educationally diverse groups received higher bonuses in environments that emphasized customer service and building customer relationships. Second, due to the tendency of groups to encourage cohesion and conformity, divergent perspectives are often marginalized. Groups that have more than just nominal representations by minority members are better positioned to succeed. For example, in mixed-gender groups, women are less likely to contribute when they are the sole female member than when there are other women on the team. Myaskovsky, Unical, and Du, 2005. But just how many minority members does it take to empower those members? Cantor's, 1977, theory on the proportion of minority to majority members suggests that skewed groups, where minority members constitute from between 1% to 15% of the group, are the most problematic for diverse members. Without a significant proportion of minority perspectives, minority members are more likely to be marginalized and subject to stereotyping. Minorities and women suffer disproportionately in their solo status as compared with males or whites. Ch8 and Thompson, 2003, found that white males performed better in their solo status roles than white women, and white women performed better than minority women. On the other hand, groups where minority working in teams. 160. Proportions range from 35% to 65% can lead to hostility and resentment among majority members because they feel that they have become outnumbered. Mannix and Neal, 2005. In reality, they are feeling what it is like to be in the minority. Thus, creating the ideal group composition can be tricky. Nuss and Dansby, 1999. Found that optimal diversity levels are obtained when the diversity subgroup comprises between 11% to 30% of the total workgroup. Finally, diversity may be more advantageous for complex tasks that require innovation, creativity, and change, while workgroups that manage existing processes and practices may not benefit as much from a diverse membership. Mannix and Neal, 2005. Yet even in groups that manage existing day-to-day operations, team leaders can utilize the power of diversity to improve task efficiency. Over time, groups can become blind to their own deficiencies and weaknesses. Diverse perspectives can help groups accurately evaluate performance and maintain the highest levels of efficiency and team performance. Leveraging difference to improve team performance. Diversity within teams can be a strategic advantage to organizations. But team leaders have to leverage those differences in order to experience the benefits. Noted diversity expert Martin Davidson, 2002, suggests that in order to reap the sizable rewards of diversity, teams must first see the differences among members, then they must understand those differences, and, finally, they must value those differences. Only then can diversity be used as a lever to transform teams that have high potential into teams that are high-performing. Seeing differences. The first step in leveraging difference is to see and acknowledge the differences among team members. As discussed earlier in this chapter, some of those differences are visible and some are not. And even when the differences are visible, some members are not aware of those differences, as seen in the opening parable about the elephant and the mouse. To benefit from diversity, teams must recognize that members are different. Once those differences are acknowledged, they can be leveraged to improve team performance. In order to see and acknowledge differences among members, teams must adopt a difference matters stance. Team leaders can model this attitude and encourage team members to do the same. For example, a team leader might say, "John, how would the marketing department see this problem?" In another example, a team leader might acknowledge the fact that a particular member is from a different country or ethnic background, and suggest that the person's unique perspective might benefit the team. Admittedly, conversations like these can be a bit awkward, but they communicate the message that differences are important. Differences can often be identified by noting points of conflict among members. Conflict not only reflect different opinions, they can also emerge from different backgrounds, different life experiences, or differences in professional training. Exploring the sources of conflict can identify the specific differences among members that have produced the difference of opinion. A team leader might say, "It seems like you two have very different ideas on this topic. Could those differences be related to your differences in personality, gender, race, or ethnicity, if appropriate, or life experiences, etc.?" Questions such as these invite members to step back from the issues at hand and reflect on why members see things differently. Chapter 8 Diversity 161. And finally, a third way to note differences is to observe silence. When certain members or subgroups within a team are silent, they might be feeling out of place or marginalized. Human beings have a deep need for acceptance and inclusion, so when a member withdraws, he or she might be feeling different from others, and thus reluctant to participate. A simple question such as, "John, I noticed you haven't said anything for a while. How are you feeling about this conversation?" can bring attention to possible feelings of isolation or rejection. It takes courage for members to speak up when they feel like they are seen as a minority or hold a minority position. Acknowledging those differences is the first step in understanding those differences. Understanding differences. Once differences are seen and acknowledged, they need to be understood. Understanding the differences among members includes understanding members' backgrounds, their worldviews, and their life experiences. Understanding differences requires the time and freedom to explore and inquire about members who are different. In addition, teams need to understand how individual member differences affect the work of the team. One of the ways to understand differences among members is to be curious. Members who are curious are able to inquire and ask questions of others who seem to be different or who might have a different perspective. It involves the regular practice of asking people to talk about themselves. "Tell me about your background and I'd like to hear more about your life experiences" are requests that invite others to tell their stories. A team leader might ask members to describe how they see themselves as both similar and different from other members on the team. Once authentic dialogue is taking place, members have to listen carefully in order to fully understand individual differences, and to validate those who are sharing potentially vulnerable information. Another way of understanding differences is to acquire information about people who come from different ethnic backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, and life experiences. Members can read and do research about what it means to come from a different gender, race, sexual orientation, country, or life experience. In order to be citizens of the world, we must be interested in and knowledgeable about other cultures and lifestyles. We need to be educated and keep an open mind about people who are different from ourselves. Because the world is becoming more multicultural and integrated, we are more likely to interact with those who come from different backgrounds. Communication is greatly enhanced when we have some context and knowledge of different groups of people. While we cannot assume everyone we meet from a certain group will share the typical characteristics of people from that group, it is a starting point that can be verified or refined based upon further conversations. Valuing differences. Finally, in order to leverage differences, teams must value those differences. Henschel, Schimla, Weg, and Kearney, 2013. Valuing differences among members occurs when teams have a true appreciation for diversity, and an appreciation for different perspectives. Valuing differences means that members resist the initial impulse to reject ideas or discount people who are different from them. Instead, they have a posture of openness and appreciation for new ideas and new perspectives because of their potential to improve the performance of the team. Working in teams. 162. One way to increase the valuing or appreciation of differences is to reduce excessive carefulness in communication. Because members do not wish to offend others, they can be reluctant to acknowledge or explore individual differences. Furthermore, asking for a woman's perspective or an African American perspective on any given subject can be problematic because it suggests that the person answering the question is speaking for the whole reference group. Instead, team leaders can ask for the perspective of someone who is a woman or someone who is African American. The question can still be awkward, but teams that leverage differences are direct and explore members' perspectives and backgrounds openly without the excessive fear of being perceived as insensitive or inappropriate. If someone does get offended by a direct question, the questioner should be quick to apologize but should also take the opportunity to reinforce the importance of different perspectives, no matter how awkward those conversations can be. Differences are leveraged when teams persist in the midst of conflict. Conflict often occurs in the storming stage of development, when differences among members are intensified. Different perspectives can cause differences of opinion, which can cause team conflict. Instead of prematurely reverting to a fight or flight response, teams that leverage differences are able to stand firm in the midst of conflict, and push through the possible discomfort that can be experienced when working within a diverse environment. Finally, groups that value differences are able to incorporate new perspectives into group discussions and team decisions. Unique perspectives are appreciated, valued, and given thoughtful consideration. In some cases, they are adopted into the processes of the group. In other cases, they are used as a catalyst to uncover unexamined assumptions and blind spots. The most effective teams are able to use difference to sharpen, expand, and then integrate new ideas. For example, imagine a task force consisting of faculty, students, and college administrators who have been asked by the Dean of Student Life to address the issue of alcohol abuse on campus. Each group of people will have very different ideas about how to define and solve the problem. One can easily imagine how age differences might affect differences of opinion. In the midst of conflicting views, students might realize they have very little power to influence the discussion, and thus only go through the motions of participation. If that happens, differences would not be leveraged, and an important opportunity for change would have been missed. On the other hand, if students, who represent a minority voice in the creation of campus policies, are valued and empowered, they can offer a perspective on alcohol abuse that is more likely to lead to lasting change on campus. Leadership in action. Globalization is a trend that is rapidly increasing. The best colleges and universities are veritable melting pots that attract scholarly, artistic, and athletic talent from around the world. Many of those students graduate and pursue work for Fortune 500 companies. These international conglomerates leverage the strengths and benefits of a broad range of countries to drive their success. As with any benefit, however, international team management comes with a cost. In one of his final lectures in a popular course, Leading and Managing Organizations, a highly respected emeritus professor at the Harvard Graduate School of Education addressed the issue of communication, the power of assumptions, and the unnecessary boundaries. Chapter 8 Diversity 163. Leaders unwittingly create for themselves by being unwilling to ask necessary, though potentially embarrassing, questions. He told his students a story about one of the first consulting engagements he had in Japan, where it is customary for the client to host the consultant for a night on the town. In class, the professor recounted the exquisite meal, exceptional musical entertainment, and luxurious bar to which the group retired after dinner. As the story goes, he was quite tired from his flight, and was ready to retire to his hotel room, when his interpreter told him it was customary to have a post-dinner drink with his hosts before finishing the evening's activities. So, as the professor put it, I decided to finish my drink as quickly as I could so I could get back to my hotel room, and go to bed. Apparently, the businessmen with him also finished their drinks quickly and ordered another round of the very expensive scotch. This seasoned professor, and internationally respected organizational expert, explained to his students that he stared warily at a second glass of scotch and decided to take one for the team, and tough it out. He hurried through the second glass and, much to his dismay, noticed that the other men around him had finished theirs just as quickly and the servers had brought a third glass to everyone. Just as the professor was raising the third glass to his lips in an effort to get through the end of the night as quickly as possible, his interpreter leaned in, excused the interruption, and asked him very politely how many more drinks he might be planning to have. The Japanese businessmen were struggling to keep up with the professor's drinking, and were ready to go home, but because of the customary honoring of a guest, they were unable to say anything. Both groups had been trying to behave respectfully toward their counterpart, but by observing custom without communicating, they had both ended up at a destination neither desired. The obvious message is that, often, as with the professor and the businessman, cultures can work past one another, and diverse international teams can bring with them unanticipated challenges, despite the best of intentions. Thus, before an encounter with an unfamiliar cultural group, it might be helpful not only to do some research but also to ask team members to describe some of their customs and expectations. Although it might be uncomfortable, leaders can model genuine interest by asking colleagues who come from a different background to describe how that background, whether cultural, racial, ethnic, or functional, influences their work on the team or project. Key terms: Universalism versus Particularism 154, Individualism versus Collectivism 154, Neutral versus Emotional 154, Specific versus Diffuse 154. Achievement versus Ascription 154, Attitudes about time 154, Attitudes about the environment 154. Discussion questions. 1. Give 3 examples of visible diversity, and 3 examples of non-visible diversity. 2. List the various ways people are different from one another. What do people do to fit into the dominant culture, and what do they do to stand out from it? Working in teams. 164. 3. What are the 7 differentiating factors that distinguish cultures? 4. What are 3 benefits of diversity? 3 challenges? 5. Describe 3 cognitive or task-related outcomes of diversity. Why is this so? 6. Describe 3 effective or relational outcomes of diversity. Why is this so? 7. In order to leverage differences among members, Davidson suggests that teams must first see, then understand, and, finally, value those differences. Describe how a team leader might facilitate this process. Group activities. Exercise 8.1, Uncovering Assumptions. Write down the first 2 or 3 characteristics that come to mind when you look at the following categories of people. There are no right or wrong answers. Please do not censor or screen your responses. After you are done, form groups of 3 to 4 to discuss your answers. Characteristics of people in the following occupations: teachers, accountants, lawyers, salespeople, janitors, secretaries, nurses. Characteristics of the following types of people: extroverts, open-minded, depressed, ambitious. Characteristics of the following groups of people: men, women. Chapter 8 Diversity 165. Japanese, French, British, Hispanics, blacks, whites, Asians. What can you learn from this activity? How do stereotypes hurt or help teams? Exercise 8.2 Leveraging Difference. You have been appointed by the principal of your local high school to make recommended guidelines about how to improve the school. Test scores and graduation rates have been in decline for 5 years, and she is desperate to reverse the trend. Form groups of 4 to 5 to address this issue, but do not actually come up with recommendations for the school. The goal of this activity is become more aware of how diversity could benefit your team on this hypothetical project. Please do the following. 1. Seeing. Describe all the ways the members of your group are different from one another. 2. Understanding. Discuss the significance of some of those differences. Share with one another how those differences have affected the way you see yourself, the way you see others, and the way you see the world. 3. Valuing. Discuss how member differences could be a benefit to the task of making recommendations to improve the school. Case 8.2, The Price of Value. The Interdisciplinary Task Force at James Williams University has been assigned the responsibility of creating a series of integrated programs for a new first-year student dormitory complex that will help students make a successful transition from high school to college. Professors, students, administrators, and student life professionals have been invited to participate on the team. At first, enthusiasm and excitement about the new dorms and the endless possibilities kept the mood high and drove the team's progress. However, when decisions needed to be made about what to include and what to cut from the proposed budget for the program, differences arose. Working in teams. 166. Faculty members were adamant about including lectures and discussions about intellectual pursuits. For example, a Renaissance English professor wanted to include formal and structured discussions around poetry and the meaning of life. Students, in contrast, wanted autonomy and freedom to define their own living environment. They wanted very few mandatory programs. Minority students wanted to emphasize the importance of diversity on campus, and to offer programming to educate students on the benefits and challenges of living in integrated communities. Administrators were passionate about drafting and implementing alcohol and drug abuse prevention policies to minimize the risk to the university. Representatives from student life wanted to hold weekly community meetings to feature core values and social events that would encourage study skills, personal responsibility, and living in community. Clearly, not all of these things could be featured in full. Something had to be sacrificed. Professor Bigwig made the emphatic statement, "Back in my day, we were serious about academic pursuit, and didn't need all of this coddling and extracurricular self-actualization. Much of this is rubbish, and we clearly need to focus our attention on giving students enough time for their studies." Student Cool Guy answered, "Hey, man. This is a different world now. With all due respect, people don't come to college to bury their nose in a book. Kids are here to have fun, meet people, and get a good job after they graduate. All of this programming is getting in the way. We just need to let kids do their own thing. The minority student interjected, "I disagree. I think the whole purpose of living in this new setting is to learn about people from different cultures, races, and religions. I think it would be a shame if we miss the opportunity to create a global community." Administrators said, "This is all well and good, but your ideas are going to cost money. We can't afford to hire anyone but resident advisors, who are paid to enforce the rules and maintain order. We can no longer afford to have students drinking and partying in the dorms. We have to stop the epidemic of underage drinking and drug use." Student Life added, "We need to ensure that students have the tools for success in college. We need this to be a cool place to live, and we need it to be a cool place to learn. This will be the only opportunity kids have to learn about living in community, personal responsibility, and life management."